Undercover boss orders hot dog at his own joint, freezes after chef makes shocking confession. That night, a light rain drizzled over the streets. Under the dim streetlights, a man pulled down the brim of his baseball cap and adjusted his simple black-rimmed glasses. A coarse fabric jacket, worn-out sneaker shoe looked no different from any passerby who might wander into this old neighborhood. But behind that ordinary appearance was Ethan Carter, 40 years old, CEO of the Bun Boss Hot Dogs chain, the man who had turned a humble food cart into an empire of 300 locations across America. 15 years ago, Ethan stood behind the counter, personally grilling each bun and meticulously adjusting every slice of pickled onion. But over time, success had pulled him away from the kitchen, pushing him into stuffy boardrooms filled with balance sheets and expansion plans. Beneath the glow of towering skyscrapers, Ethan drifted further and further from the scent of toasted buns and the sizzling sound of sausages on cast-iron skillets, the very things that built the Bun Boss brand. The latest reports left Ethan uneasy. Stand 17, one of his very first locations, and once his pride was showing signs of decline, revenue numbers seemed fine, but profits were mysteriously dropping, and online reviews were starting to hint at dissatisfaction. Overpriced, not the same quality as before. 3 times, Ethan requested detailed financial breakdowns, and 3 times what came back were spotless numbers. Too spotless. That's when his instinct shown from those early days of counting every cent kicked in. Ethan made a decision. It was time to return to the old kitchen. But this time, not as a CEO, but as an unnoticed customer. He took on a new name, Luke Barrett, scribbled that alias onto the reservation sheet. With that, Ethan walked through the glass doors of Stand 17. The scent of brown butter, the crackling sound of sausages on the grill, and the warm light washing over the faded menu boards, it all swept him back to a distant time. Yet, in that same moment, Ethan realized something wasn't right. Not the flavors, not the space, but the atmosphere. A young boy wiped the counter absent-mindedly. The cashiers whispered among themselves, their eyes drifting disinterestedly over the customers. And in the open kitchen, a young man quietly worked, meticulously perfecting each hot dog with the kind of disciplined focus that bordered on obsession. Ethan smiled knowingly. The play had already begun, and for the first time in years, he wasn't just a spectator. He was the hidden protagonist in this unfolding story. The curtain had risen, and the truth was waiting to be revealed. Ethan Carter, now hidden under the name Luke Barrett, sat silently in the shadowed corner near the register, his cap pulled low, the dim lights casting shadows across his weathered face. He wasn't waiting for a takeaway order. He was there to listen and to witness. Across the counter, Jessica and Melissa, 2 young cashiers, were chatting animatedly, seemingly oblivious to the world around them. But amidst the clatter of receipt printers and the soft pattering of rain beginning to fall against the glass windows, every word they spoke cut through the humid air like a blade. "Did you see Chef Ethan? Thinks he's cooking at some New York Michelin restaurant," Jessica sneered, tilting her chin toward the kitchen with a mocking half-smile. Melissa giggled, lowering her voice but still loud enough for someone quietly observing to hear. "Travis was right. Give that man a little special seasoning in his work. Last week I swapped his sea salt for regular table salt. You should have seen his face when the flavors didn't come out right. Absolutely hilarious." Jessica laughed and tapped the counter lightly. "That's nothing. Yesterday, I adjusted the seafood delivery schedule. Had them deliver in the afternoon instead of the morning. Let's see how Mr. Perfect Chef manages when the fresh ingredients aren't ready in time." And their laughter rang out. Meanwhile, Ethan's heart tightened painfully. All the recent complaints about quality, it wasn't bad management or declining skill. This was deliberate sabotage. A cold, calculated scheme orchestrated by Travis, the former sous chef at Carter's Steakhouse, now comfortably seated at their biggest rival, Capitol Grill. And then, like a thunderclap amidst the now pouring rain, Ethan heard Melissa whisper, "At this rate, just a few more screw-ups, enough complaints from customers, and Travis will come back here in triumph. And she lifted her hand as if raising a toast, "we'll split the bonus from Uncle Travis. He promised us a big payout if we can knock Ethan out of that position." Ethan froze. His pride as a founder, as a brother, felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been thrown over him. But the real shock wasn't over yet. Melissa squinted toward the kitchen and added, "Hey, have you noticed that guy looks kind of familiar? Like someone from the Bun Boss Empire or something?" Jessica burst out laughing. "Oh, please, if that kind of guy's a big boss, I'll crawl under this counter right now. Let Travis handle it. Doesn't matter how talented he is without someone backing him. He's nothing but a loser waiting to be tossed out." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. His breath caught painfully in his throat. All these years, he had pushed aside his pride, refused the hand his older brother Michael Carter once offered, determined to stand on his own and never live in anyone's shadow. And yet today, right here, they spoke of him as if he were nothing more than an anonymous name waiting to be discarded. At that moment, Ethan's gaze landed on an old photo hanging on the wall the grand opening of Stand 17. In the center of the frame, Michael Carter stood beaming next to the old hot dog cart from all those years ago. And then, the memories came flooding back. That photo, those dishes, the sweet and savory taste of the days when the two brothers stood side by side over a sizzling grill, promising each other they would create something greater than just food. In that moment, Ethan Cartera, 40-year-old man who had weathered countless ups and downs, suddenly realized he couldn't stay silent any longer. This battle wasn't just about preserving a title, it was about preserving his very sense of self-worth. That night's rain had stopped, but within Michael Carter's heart, waves of unrest began to surge relentlessly. He returned to Stand 17 more often, no longer waiting for luxurious dinner hours or peak business times. Instead, Michael showed up unexpectedly during the quietest hours, 10 a.m. when the kitchen was just starting up, 3 p.m. when employees grew lax, or around 9 p.m. when long shifts wore down discipline. And it was in those moments that Michael witnessed firsthand the cunning tricks Jessica, Melissa, and their close circle of staff silently carried out. That noon, hidden near the bar, Michael saw Melissa sneakily replace the special finishing salt used for the signature steak with cheap industrial salt. The next day at lunch, Jessica accidentally delayed the seafood delivery by 4 hours, forcing the kitchen to use frozen ingredients for the fresh seafood menu. Michael clenched his fists, his eyes never leaving Ethan's upright figure in the kitchen. Despite being pushed into impossible situations, Ethan managed the kitchen smoothly, never once complaining. The warm glow of the fire reflected on his sweat-dappled face. His eyes lit up every time he finished plating a perfect steak, even when forced to work with subpar ingredients. Once, a customer complained that the demi-glace sauce tasted strange. Michael quietly observed as Ethan tasted it himself, his brow tightening. Who allowed beef stock to be replaced with seasoning powder? Ethan's voice was low but firm. No one answered. He didn't interrogate anyone. Instead, he simply turned back to the kitchen, personally starting a fresh batch of sauce, pulling out a jar of beef stockone he had probably prepared in advance, expecting exactly this kind of situation. Michael swallowed hard. That image took him back to his own beginnings, 15 years ago, in their very first tiny kitchen sweat mixing with the heat of the fire, driven by an unshakable belief. Quality and honor are not things to be bargained with. But the true climax arrived one Sunday morning when Michael broke his own rule and returned to the corporate headquarters. With a high-level access card in hand, he logged into the company's HR management system for the first time in years to view the personnel file of Executive Chef Ethan Walker, the man who had stirred emotions in him for so long with his talent and unwavering integrity. But when the screen lit up and the words, birth name, Ethan Carter appeared, Michael froze. His heart clenched as if someone had just squeezed it tight. His eyes scanned through the information, and the past suddenly replayed like a slow-motion film. It was his younger brother, the one who stormed out of their little house in Chicago after a blazing argument. The young man who once declared to his face, I don't need your charity, Michael. I'll prove my worth without the Carter name. For 7 long years, Ethan chose silence, quietly studying, building experience in restaurants that had nothing to do with the Carter legacy. And then, under the name Ethan Walker, their mother's surname, he applied to the very restaurant chain his brother founded under a completely different name. All to face a fair challenge, no favoritism, no special treatment. Michael leaned back, his eyes growing heavy. A deep, weighted sigh escaped his chest. For the first time in over a decade, Michael Carter felt small humbled before the integrity and pride of a man who shared his blood. One question echoed in his mind. Have I gone so far down the path of business that I forgot where I started? Michael half closed his eyes as memories he thought long buried resurfaced vividly. He saw that young Ethan, again messy-haired, eyes bright with wonder as he stood by their father's old charcoal grill. Back then, Michael had always been the stern older brother, sometimes far too harsh. And yet, at just 13 years old, Ethan was already experimenting, trying to find the perfect seasoning blend for steakone that wouldn't overpower the smoky aroma of the grill. You always think I just follow orders, but have you ever even tasted what I created? That sentence, which Michael once dismissed with a cynical laugh, now echoed back like a verdict being read aloud. His eyes landed once again on the screen, on the ID photo of Ethan. The name Walker typed clearly the surname their late mother had always carried with pride. Michael remembered her words at their last full family dinner. Sometimes, the most precious thing a man has isn't his name but what he's willing to do to protect his dignity. Michael clenched his fists. Behind Ethan's cool exterior and proud posture were countless nights of struggle, sleepless nights, so many times rejected simply because he lived in the shadow of a brother too great to escape. And when he finally stood tall, when he was ready to walk into his brother's empire with his head held high, he still chose to do it under another name, never borrowing the borrowed glory of Carter. Michael's eyes burned. He quietly opened each attached file in the system. Ethan's achievements. Top of his class at the Culinary Academy, former executive chef at a prestigious restaurant in Portland, glowing recommendation letters from veteran head chef Saul kept quietly, never once boasted about. Ethan let his food speak for him, letting every dish prove his worth. And then, Michael opened one last file. It was a personal note where Ethan meticulously outlined cost optimization strategies that wouldn't compromise the quality of the food. Below, in his familiar handwriting, Ethan had written, "If all you care about is profit and forget what first brought diners to the table, then even an empire is nothing more than a pile of ashes waiting to collapse." Michael's hand trembled. How long had it been since he stopped thinking about anything but the numbers in his reports? How long had it been since he remembered that very first steak, the one that had once brought tears of joy to his eyes? How long had he sat behind the closed doors of boardrooms and forgotten the feeling of standing over a hot stove, shirt soaked in sweat, listening to the sizzle of oil in the pan? And now, it was his own younger brother, the one he had once dismissed, as a dreamer fighting alone, right at the heart of the Carter Empire, to preserve what Michael himself had lost, the honor of the culinary craft and the integrity behind every dish served. Michael stood up, as if casting off a weight that had pressed down on his shoulders for years. Outside the window, the first light of dawn had broken through. He knew that tomorrow, he wouldn't remain seated in his office anymore. It was time to do what he hadn't dared face for the last 7 years or so. Walk back into that kitchen, stand before his brother, and make things right. Michael Carter whispered to himself, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Not because I'm the owner, but because I owe you an apology, Ethan." Under the warm glow of Carter's Steakhouse, an emergency meeting was held on a Friday afternoon right before the dinner service. The air in the room was heavy, so tense it felt like you could slice it with a knife. For the first time in years, Michael Carter wasn't wearing an expensive tailored suit. Instead, he donned his old leather jacket, just like the man he used to be, simple, direct, and uncompromising in the face of deception. As all the staff gathered, their eyes filled the room with suspicion and anxiety. In a dim corner, Jessica and Melissa exchanged worried glances, while Robert, the restaurant manager, kept a calm facade, but his clenched fists under the table revealed bulging veins. Michael stepped to the center of the room, his eyes sweeping across everyone present. His deep, warm voice echoed, "I have a story to tell you, a story about honor, about loyalty, and about those who are willing to sell out everything for a handful of filthy dollars." With that, he signaled the tech team. The big screen at the end of the room lit up, playing surveillance footage from the security cameras. Each video clip cut sharp and clear like painful, undeniable slices of the truth. Scene after scene played out, Jessica secretly swapping the salt, Melissa deliberately adjusting the delivery schedules, Robert, in his office, shaking hands with Travis, their greatest rival, and accepting a thick white envelope. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room like a brewing storm. Faces of the betrayers turned pale. Michael stood firm, his gaze unwavering, and his voice rang out with unshakable authority. "This ends today. Robert, Jessica, Melissa, do you have anything to say before I end this right here?" Robert was drenched in sweat, his lips trembling. It's just a misunderstanding, Mr. Carter. Michael raised his hand, cutting him off. "Misunderstandings don't exist when honor has already been sold. You're all fired. Effective immediately." The room held its collective breath. Security entered, calm but firm, escorting the three out. Jessica and Melissa kept their heads down, tears rolling freely. Robert tried to maintain his pride, but couldn't hide the humiliation as he silently walked out of the room. When the door closed, Michael stood motionless for a few seconds. Then his gaze shifted to the one person who had stood silently at the back of the room the entire time, Ethan. "Perhaps it's time I take off the mask I've been hiding behind all these years." Michael stepped forward. Each step felt heavy, as if he were carrying the weight of all his regrets. His eyes settled on the face of the younger brother, strong and resilient, yet scarred by wounds Michael himself had inflicted through years of pride and distance. Ethan Carter. Michael's voice cracked, his throat tightening. Then, summoning all his courage, he spoke again. I'm sorry. For these past 7 years, I left you to bear everything alone, when I should have stood beside you, fought with you instead of looking down from above. Ethan stood motionless, his face taut, lips pressed tightly to hold back the surge of emotions. The silence stretched painfully long, until finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low and hoarse, but firm. I don't need an apology, Michael. All I ask is that from now on, the values we once believed in, don't ever let them be lost again. And for the first time in 7 long years, Michael Carter stepped forward and gripped his brother's shoulder tightly. As scattered applause slowly swelled into thunderous clapping across the room, the Carter brothers stood there not just as men bearing the Carter name, but as guardians of the family's honor. The legacy of a brand built from sweat, tears, and the most enduring values was once again in their hands. The story wasn't over, but in that moment, a new chapter had undeniably begun. Welcome home, Ethan, Michael whispered. That quiet sentence, though soft, echoed through the vast room. Ethan's eyes welled up, but he held tightly to his pride. His hand gently patted Michael's back, a gesture both of forgiveness and a reminder. From now on, we walk forward together. No one stands behind the other. A round of applause broke out, but it wasn't the polite, perfunctory clapping typical of corporate meetings. It was warm, heartfelt, and thunderous. It came from those who still held loyalty in their hearts, who still believed that Carter's Steakhouse was a place where people could stand tall and work with pride without bending to lowly schemes. Michael turned back to face his entire team. For the first time, he didn't speak as a CEO, but as a man who had experienced loss and realized that if he didn't protect these values now, one day he would lose everything. Today, Michael's voice rang out deep, warm, and commanding, is the day we reclaim the honor of Carter's Steakhouse. And the first person I want to officially recognize, not under a borrowed name, but under the name that carries the spirit of resilience in the heart of our cuisines, Chef Ethan Carter, the new executive chef of Stand 17. The room erupted. Everyone stood, and the applause thundered like a wave breaking against the shore. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with the fire of a warrior who had walked through storms and now stood tall to raise the flag of honor himself. For the first time, in front of the entire staff, he stood proudly as his full name was spoken aloud, no longer hiding, no longer shrinking from it. Michael approached his brother, pulling from his jacket pocket a finely crafted silver pin engraved with the words, Legacy and Honor, Carter's Steakhouse. It was the same pin their father used to wear when he stood by the stove, a man who once said, a great chef doesn't just know how to cook well, he knows how to preserve his character through every flame he faces. Michael fastened the pin onto Ethan's pristine chef's jacket. His hand trembled slightly, but his smile was steady. From this day on, Michael said softly, you don't just stand in the kitchen of Carter's, you stand in the hearts of everyone who has called and will call this place their second home. Ethan bowed his head in acceptance, then turned to face his team. His voice rang out sharp and clear like a perfectly honed chef's knife. Thank you all for staying. I won't promise the days ahead will be easy, but I give you my word, this kitchen will never again have a place for deceit. Endo. The room burst into applause once more, this time a vow, a rebirth. From the far end of the room, the oldest staff member, Mr. Marco, once a colleague of Michael from the very first day, slowly stepped forward. He placed his hand gently on the shoulders of the two brothers and said, welcome home, not just back to each other, but back to the very flame that once lit up this place. Ember. As the last golden rays of sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the Carter brothers, everyone present knew, that evening, Carter's Steakhouse wasn't just opening its doors to customers, it was officially stepping into a new era. 3 months later, since that day regarded as a turning point for Carter's Steakhouse, the air at Stand 17 felt entirely transformed. From the bright eyes and genuine smiles of every staff member, to the perfectly crafted steak dishes served with precision, everything exuded a vibrant energy and deep sense of pride. And today, beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Grand Hall, a formal appointment ceremony was held right at the very place that had once witnessed the harshest internal conflicts. Michael Carter, his face glowing with a radiance no one had seen for years, stepped onto the stage. The gleaming silver badge on his lapel caught the light, standing as a bold declaration of a new chapter that had just begun. Today, he began, his warm, resonant voice filling the hall, I stand before you not only as the founder of Carter's Steakhouse, but as a brother, a father, and above all, a man who has learned that nothing is more valuable than loyalty, recognizing true talent, and honoring bonds that must never be forgotten. He paused, turning toward Ethan standing tall by his side, dressed in a crisp, white chef's jacket, embroidered proudly with Ethan Carter, Executive Chef, and free. I officially announce, before all our staff and those who have stood by Carter's through every mile of this long journey, from this day on, Chef Ethan Carter will assume the position of Executive Chef of the Carter's Steakhouse chain, a man who has not only proven his skill through every perfect dish, but who has upheld his dignity and refused to bow before even the harshest trials. Applause erupted like waves crashing on the shore, powerful, heartfelt, and unstoppable. Ethan's eyes glistened with tears, but he held his head high. His gaze shone with a pride not born from a title, but because finally the name Carter embroidered over his heart was no longer a borrowed legacy. It stood as a testament to his own hard-fought journey, built without favors, without shortcuts. From that moment on, Carter's Steakhouse experienced a powerful resurgence. Revenues soared. Customers returned, not merely for the legendary steaks, but because they found something more: a warm spirit of family, a deeply human story woven into every corner of the restaurant. Yet, perhaps the most moving moment wasn't during the ceremony itself, but later that very afternoon, when the restaurant's grand glass doors slowly swung open. The two men stood tall in the center of the hall, Michael and Ethan walking out arm in arm like warriors who had weathered the storms of pride and ambition and were now returning to their rightful place in each other's hearts. With steady, deliberate steps, they made their way toward the car waiting at the entrance. The car door opened, and their elderly mother, her hair silver as snow, her eyes dim with age, but her smile still radiant, was gently helped out by Michael, while Ethan tenderly took her frail hands. Amid the soft applause and under the golden hues of the setting sun bathing the entrance, their mother, a symbol of their roots, of unconditional love, was led into the warm kitchen where the flames of dignity and family had never once flickered out. The doors quietly closed behind them, but the story of perseverance, redemption, and familial love would echo on forever. A human message. Asterisk. You can build an empire from nothing, but if you forget why you started, all you've built is a castle made of sand. A sustainable business isn't forged from hastily signed contracts or numbers that dance on financial reports. It's built upon unwavering loyalty, upon the respect for every talent, whether humble or extraordinary, and above all, it endures through relationships that are never left behind. Because in the end, what makes a brand truly stand the test of time isn't the sign hanging above the door, but the people behind the kitchen walls with a flame that never dies in their hearts. Asterisk.